Welcome to Papa's Workshop. Well, over the last 6-7 years now, I've had this router table in the shop, and it's actually worked fantastic. The router lift I designed and built, and again, it worked fantastic. But as with anything else, it does get old. And the router that I had in it was probably 40 or more years old, and it was time for an upgrade too. In fact, it needed some brushes, and I'm having a hard time finding them. But I went ahead and upgraded the lift today, and this lift came from Banggood, which it takes a while for the shipping, but the product is fantastic. So today I want to show you how I installed this, made a new top, and have my router table back in operation. So let's get started. I have the router lift sitting on the workbench upside down. I wanted you to see the bottom of it. This is really a very massive, heavy router lift. It is very sturdy, very strong, and there's nothing lightweight about it at all. I was very impressed. It also has all of the screws, the mounts, the templates, even comes with the router bits so that you can cut the slot in it. It is a very complete set. So I'm very impressed when I first opened the box. Now this is the reducer that holds the actual router. Now this is shipped separate, and this has caused a problem for a lot of people because this will arrive first and there's no lift. Well, you got to be patient. This came after about a week and a half, and then the router lift itself came 6 weeks later. So it takes quite a while, but don't get discouraged. Now here's the page on the Banggood of the router lift itself. And you have to be able to look down to be able to see which reducer that you actually need. Because right down below on that same page is a chart that says which router, the size that you need. Now I chose to go with the DeWalt 611, so you need to be able to choose the correct reducer. And this is the overall dimensions, 30 centimeters by 23.5 centimeters. The plate itself is 1 centimeter thick. As far as the assembly, it is super easy. The only thing you really have to do is put the 3 screws into this mount right there. They give you the Allen wrench, the screws. Put those 3 screws in. Make sure that the router is going to be aligned for the center of your opening, and the assembly is done. As far as being able to make sure that the router is centered, this is a slotted hole so that you can adjust back and forth until the router is centered. They also give you a pin to put into the router to be able to align it. I actually did the alignment off camera, and virtually it was dead on without hardly any adjustments whatsoever. And that's why I, quite frankly, didn't see the need to show that in the camera. Later in the video, toward the end, I do put that centering pin back into the router and raise the router through the red plate just to verify that nothing had moved and it was still centered. So you'll be able to see how that actually works. But the alignment is not difficult at all. And as I said, I really didn't need to have to do really any adjustments at all. The thing that I really like about this router mount is that you can have such a wide variety of different routers to choose from. These reducing rings are perfect. They just slip right into the opening, and then from there you can just slip the router in. It has that little screw right there that actually tightens, and it has the little clamping lock that holds it in place. And then when you put the router in, then you can just simply tighten that and have the router mounted exactly where you want it. Now this is the same wrench that you're going to use to be able to raise and lower the router on a daily basis as you use the router. It just has a different size socket that'll just snap on. Now with this router, it does have the push button to be able to lock the router so that you can change the bit. So I had to be able to slide that all the way up onto the mount so I would have access to it. So keep that in mind. Different routers are going to have different methods for being able to change the bit. On the DeWalt 611 with that little push button, I needed to be able to slide that router all the way up so I could still be able to push that in with my fingers. Many of you may ask, why did I choose a trim router, the DeWalt 611? Well, quite frankly, I already have two, and the CNC machines. I keep on hand a handful of brushes, so anytime I need to change them, I can. I don't have to worry, as I did with my old router in the router table, of not being able to find the brushes. So this is mainly out of convenience. The reducer is a perfect fit for this router, and quite frankly, it's going to be a lot quieter also. The other nice thing about this is, quite frankly, I'm not sure where I want that cord to come out, and I'm not sure exactly the position where I want that button when I'm changing the various bits. So to be able to make an adjustment is just simply a matter of loosening that one screw, making the adjustment, and putting it back in. Once I get this into the router table, I'm sure I'm going to be changing it again. So I'm trying to think the best way possible to have this set up now, and quite frankly, it's really just a best guess. But this is what I've chosen to do right now to be able to have this router mounted. But I hope you can see just how easy it is to be able to make the adjustment once I decide to change it and have that cord route a different place, or have that button be a little bit easier or a more convenient place to be able to push to be able to change the bits. Now that the router mount's completely done, let's head over to the router table itself. This has worked out exceptionally well over the years, and I'm very impressed with this old router table. But the mount itself for the router was big, bulky, but I still got to say it worked perfect. It had the locking mechanism there. It had my bolt to be able to raise and lower the router. And I just used a socket to be able to do that. And this is the old router. This was a Milwaukee router that, quite frankly, is about 40 years or more old. On the back of the router table, I have a outlet there so that I can plug in the vacuum. That way, one switch turns on the router and the vacuum at the same time. The next step is just to go ahead and remove the back of the router table. That will give me the access to the screws that hold the table on the base of this router table. And yes, I designed it this way because I knew at some point I would be upgrading the router or the router mount. I also have the outlet where I can plug it in to an outlet inside of the router table. Again, that way it makes it where I can remove the back of this table very easily. It just simply unplugs and I can set it out of the way. So I went ahead and unscrewed the tabletop and the router mount itself and took the old router out. I bet you haven't seen one of these before unless you're an old timer like me. But this is an old Milwaukee 5610 router. And as you might expect, the brushes are almost impossible to find. But I wanted to be able to just take a quick second, open up and look at the brushes. After this many years, I don't think these brushes have ever been changed, and quite frankly, this router has been used more in the last 6 years than it did for the first 35 years of its life. So this is the original set of brushes. For that, let's get back to making a new top. So this top is going to be the exact same size as my old one. I'm not going to make any changes there. So I had a piece of the black MDF that I'm going to be using for this, and quite frankly, if I had the white, I would use the white, but this is what I've got on hand, so I'm going to go ahead and cut it. Now this was used. It had some holes in it where it had been screwed in to the different types of fixtures in the past, so I wanted to be able to cut that off first so it left with a very nice smooth edges and no holes from previous screws that were in the different wood. So literally all 4 sides had to be cut. The original top was actually 2 layers thick. It had the white melamine on top, and then it had a 3/4 inch plywood on the bottom, and I had laminated them together and of course glued and screwed it. Now this is just a one piece, so what I'm going to do, instead of just doubling up the melamine and wasting the material, I'm just cutting the top to size, and then later on, before the final assembly, I'll go ahead and add strips to the bottom to be able to give the proper thickness so that the fence that I had on the original router table will still work with this new tabletop. Now while I'm cutting this out, please take just a moment and hit that subscribe button, and don't forget to hit the little bell notification next to it so that you'll be notified on all the videos that I'm uploading. I don't want you to miss out on any of the different videos that I'm making. I do have a lot of interesting things coming up in the near future. Now that the tabletop is cut, I need to go ahead and locate the center of the router. Now I want this exactly where it was before because it worked. It worked real well. Now in the instruction, they do give some recommendations, but for my purpose, I want the router exactly where it was. Now included in the kit is this template. This template is perfect to be able to align exactly where you want to be able to have the hole cut, and then you'll be able to cut it out. Now once I had everything measured, I used the T-square to be able to make sure that everything was exactly square to the tabletop itself. By being able to put a couple of the guidelines exactly where it needed to be, it gave the perfect alignment so that I can attach this template to the table. The next thing I want to do is just go ahead and cut the rough opening of this hole, and I'm just using the paddle bit to be able to give me a hole to be able to use the jigsaw to be able to cut the rough opening. And this takes just a minute. With the guidelines in place, it gives me the perfect opportunity to be able to follow that and cut it. From there, I can just peel the double stick tape off, that little protective coating, and then I'll be able to put the template right down in place on the guidelines. Now I said they included everything, and yeah they do. This is the router bit that is included with the kit, and this has your ball bearing guides on it, and it had one on the top and the bottom. So it depends on your situation as to which one you want to use. Now for my application, the way I have it set up, I'm going to be using the ball bearing guide that's closest to the plate on the router itself, or the bottom bearing. I'm not going to use the top bearing at all. It's very important to be able to make sure that you set the depth correct so that the bearing is going to run right along the edge of that template. Too high, too low, and you're going to have a problem. So take just a little bit of extra time to make sure that that bearing is set exactly where it needs to be. And then you'll be ready to cut. The last thing I decided to do is just get the jigsaw out again. I wanted to be able to cut closer to the template. I don't want to have the router have to remove that much material. So with the jigsaw, I could cut very close to the template and makes it so much easier for the router. And now with that done, I can go ahead and use the trim router and get everything cut. Now this trim router and this MDF, or the medium density fiberboard, kicks up an awful lot of sawdust. So it's very, very important to make sure that anytime that you're using the trim router and this MDF, make sure that you use the respirator to be able to protect your lungs, and also don't forget the hearing protection. Then I like to clean up quickly to make sure that I get rid of that dust out of the shop just as quickly as I can. The other thing that helps keep the air clean is I have a central system that filters the air in the whole shop. That helps to remove those fine particles that are airborne that circulate around the whole entire shop. This dust is not good for your lungs, so please take care of that. Removing the template just takes a little spatula, just get under the edge, and then you can just lift it right up. This double stick tape that they use really holds well. You don't have to worry about it just falling off when you don't want it to. So just using a putty knife like this just to loosen it up, and then it'll slip off. Now I'm going to take this template and I'm going to store it, because you never know. Later on down the road I may need to make a new top for my router, and I want to be able to have this template available should I need to be able to change that out and move that router lift into another tabletop. The next step on this process is to go ahead and mount these little corner brackets. Now in the kit, they give you two sets of screws, a long and short set of screws for it. Unfortunately, in my situation where I'm using this 3/4 inch MDF, both sets of screws were too long. So I had to go to my own bin of screws that I have and pick out the screws that I needed. For my application, I needed screws that were about 3/4 of an inch long. These corner brackets fit perfectly into the corner of this opening. The curve that's created by the template and the curve that's designed in these corner brackets is perfect. All I needed to do is mark where the screw holes were going to be, and I was going to pre-drill this and be able to use the screws of my shop to be able to put these on. Now I have this little tool that self-centers the bit right into the hole, and that really makes it easy because I want this just as accurate as I can possibly get it and not have any excess movement at all. And this self-centering tool is perfect application for this. This gives me the perfect alignment, and this little corner bracket is not going to move at all. And then putting in the screws is just really simple. You know the alignment is going to be exact, and all I need to do is just screw the screws into position and the corner bracket's done. This is actually a very easy and simple process to be able to do. Okay, the tabletop is done. So let's go ahead and move the tabletop back over to the router table, and we will get it screwed down and get ready to do this final assembly. I hope you can see that this process to be able to assemble this and put this new router lift in position into this new table is really a very simple process to do. Before I screw down the top to the table itself, I want to be able to go ahead and drop the router lift into position. That way I can make all the adjustments, make sure that it's flush and level to the table, and should I need to make any adjustment by getting underneath or turning things around, I don't have to unscrew that tabletop again. Now you can see there, I need to make sure I turn that router lift around and orient it in the correct direction. To be able to get this router lift flush with the tabletop, they give you these little set screws. Now they also give you several different lengths that you need, so you have to be able to pick the right one. For my application, I needed the smallest one to be able to screw in there. Now on each of the corners, you have two of these little set screws. Now this is something that you want to take your time with. Don't rush this step because you want to be able to screw in these little set screws and make sure that you raise up the top of this router mount flush with the surface. And it's actually very easy to do, but you want to be able to take time and work all four corners at the same time, because as you move one corner, it'll affect the other corner. So take your time, use a straight edge, and get all of these screws set to the proper depth so that the surface is completely flush with the tabletop itself. Now because there's two of these set screws in each corner, if you raise up one side, it will actually, in essence, loosen the other one. So you want to have a little bit of tension on both of the set screws in each of the corners. That's why I say it takes just a little bit of time to be able to do. Because as you're making those fine adjustments and you raise it up with one of the set screws, that second set screw in that corner is going to raise up and not touch that plate underneath. So you want to have just a little bit of pressure on both of them so both of the set screws are actually touching the little corner bracket underneath to be able to give the proper support. Once you have all of the adjustments made, then you have 4 more screws to be able to put in, and that in essence creates a locking mechanism. So it actually screws the top of this router lift down through the bracket and holds everything nice, secure, and tight. Last step is just to double check everything with the straight edge to make sure that it's completely flush with the tabletop itself. Then now you can go ahead and test out the router lift. This is nice. It works so smooth and it's easy to be able to raise it up with this tool. Now in the router, I have that centering pin mounted. So I went ahead and just snapped on the cover that gives you almost a zero clearance. And I wanted to make sure that that was dead center, because this is where I had said earlier I was going to show you, and I would need to be able to make those small adjustments. And in this case, like I said earlier, really did need to make any adjustments. This guide pin is exactly in the center of this hole, and that's perfect. That's what you want. Should I needed to make any adjustments, those 3 screws that I put in first, that I said were slotted holes, that's where those adjustments would have been made. The last thing I want to do is show you by flipping over this tabletop so that you can see the strips that I put in. These strips actually provide the thickness that I need to be able to match the old tabletop. That way the fence is going to clamp on exactly the same. Plus this will give a little bit of extra support and keep it from warping. And I certainly don't want a tabletop sagging in the middle. And with all the support from these strips and the way the table is designed itself, that should not happen at all. So now I'm just going to go ahead and feed the wire through down into the opening where it needs to be. And we'll just flip over the tabletop and center it and go ahead and screw it in position. The excess cord from the router, I can just simply roll it up and just set it right inside of this compartment. This compartment is large enough to be able to handle the switch, the plug, and the outlet that I have to be able to plug everything in, plus all the extra cord. With all of that done now, I just went ahead and centered the top onto the base of this table and screwed it in. Now I clamped everything down so nothing would move, and then I just simply screwed in the screws to hold it in place. After screwing in the back onto the router table, I'm just going to put this front plate on, and that will complete it. This job is finished. Now this router lift comes from China, and it's through Banggood. Now I've read a lot of the comments that people have had on their site, and there has been 2 complaints. One, it takes a long time to get, and so you have to be a little patient. It took about 6 weeks to get mine. Now, if you order the reducer ring to be able to accommodate a smaller router, then that is actually shipped separate. Typically, you get that first. And one of the comments that I saw in their website is that they got the ring and they never got the router lift itself. Well, they probably just need to be a little bit patient, because the same thing happened to me. The actual reducer ring came pretty quick, but I had to wait about 6 weeks before the lift itself came. So just a little bit of patience, but I tell you, I believe it's well worth it. Okay, it's time to test it out. Now I've got everything in this top left drawer, all the supplies that I need, so I just need to be able to pick the correct insert, and I'm just going to use a 1/4 inch round over bit to be able to test this out real quick. So the first thing, let's just go ahead and raise up the router so I have access to being able to put this bit in, and of course I need to be able to get access to that button that I told you about that locks the router so that I can tighten the bit in position. So literally all I have to do now, because I have easy access to it, I can drop it in with my thumb. I'm going to hold that button down and I can just tighten the bit. So this actually works real easy. Now I'm having to get around on the back side of the router table to be able to do this. So right now I'm going to tell you, I'm going to be changing that button and moving this around to get it to be a little bit more of a comfortable position. But that's what I said earlier. It's going to take a little bit of trial and error. So at this point, the bit's in, so I can just lower it back down. I'll put the insert in. We'll set the correct depth, and we'll be ready to make that first test. Now this little white guide pin is also included, and I just screwed it into one of the 3 holes that are available to be able to choose from. So after just making a quick little test cut, you can see this in the camera. That's perfectly smooth. It's exactly level the way it should be. I like it. And I'm also, you can't hear it because I turned the volume down on the router, but this is so much quieter than the old router that I had in here. The next thing I want to test is just go ahead and put the fence on and make sure that that is going to work properly. Now I hooked up the hose to the vacuum so I'll have the dust collection, and I also plugged the vacuum cleaner into that outlet that's on the back of the router table. That way, when I turn the router on, it will turn both the router and the vacuum on at the same time. So now let's just do another quick test, and yes, the fence works perfectly. So here's test number 2. The results are the same. It looks fantastic, and I have good dust collection with the fence in place. I am so happy that I did this upgrade. This is so much nicer than my old one, which was completely wearing out. I have much more space underneath now, and quite frankly, I can add another shelf in there. Yeah, it'll get dusty and it'll be easy to vacuum out, but I don't need that hole anymore. So this was an excellent upgrade. It was well worth the wait.